So, I don't mention it a whole lot, but out of all the anime I watch, I have three specific favorites. ReZero, Zatch Bell, and the final spot goes to Dragon Ball. With Dragon Ball being the one that got me into anime in the first place. And it's cemented its place on one of my favorites for being just so fun. I love the series. And when I heard about DBZ Kakarot, I admit, while I was interested, I didn't really have a need to pick it up due to already knowing the whole story of Dragon Ball Z. So I never did. And that's how it was probably going to stay, in all honesty, until something happened. The game became free to play on PlayStation Plus. So I decided to say, what the hell, and try it out. And after playing through it on Twitch, I gotta say, it was alright, I guess. I mean, I enjoyed it, but I had some big issues with it. But before we get into those issues, how about we talk about what was great about the game first? I've rambled enough, let's get into it. Okay, to be honest here, this is probably going to be my first review where I have more negatives things to say about this game than positives. But you better believe I'm going to give this game the credit it deserves. First off, the graphics. This is easily one of, if not the best looking Dragon Ball game ever made. The people over at CyberConnect really know how to bring an anime game graphical style to its full potential. The world feels almost perfectly like it's ripped from the manga, and I really enjoyed flying around it and exploring, even with the weird button layout they give you. It was cool to just fly around and see all the references to the show, like running into Pilaf and Ader, or fighting all the red ribbon bases, playing the fishing, and even the goofy-ass car driving minigame. That really made me smile that we got that. Or even finding memories of certain episodes from the series. And while I do have issues with it, I gotta say, I like the combat of this game. It does a good job emulating the speed and ferocity of the battles that we all cheered on as kids. Landing full combos and slamming enemies with super attacks feels very satisfying, especially when you level them up in the skill trees and utilize the command board. Whenever you remember you have it, of course. And since this is Dragon Ball, you also have access to transformations that make your character more powerful. And I honestly love how they're handled here. I love how the higher the level of Super Saiyan you go, it drains your ki gauge faster, or how using Kaioken actively drains your health. It makes them feel more like high risk, high reward type of power-ups, instead of everything drains the same amount of ki. You also have access to a burst mode, where when the gauge is full, you gain a super boost that buffs all of your attacks for a short time. It's a great ace in the hole for when you need to go all out against a powerful boss. And as someone who played the game on hard, this was incredibly useful in a few fights where I was caught off guard during my story mode playthrough. I was going to talk about story a bit here, but at the same time, there really isn't much to talk about. The game just follows the canonical Dragon Ball Z storyline with some minor add-ons that we'll get to later, so there's not really a whole lot to talk about. I liked going through the story again, don't get me wrong, but it is just a rehash of the anime/manga, so there's not really a whole lot to talk about. And that's kind of it. Those were my pros of this game. Now let's get to what I didn't like. Be ready, because I've got quite a few complaints. Alright, I've given this game the praise it deserved. Time for me to start tearing into it. For starters, the cutscenes. Now, Kakarot has a beautiful world and some absolutely phenomenal cutscenes. But there are certain moments of the game where cutscenes are either just models with only their mouths moving, or just still images with a narrator talking over them. Normally, I don't have a problem with this. I can easily overlook that. But when you see some of the most beautiful anime game cutscenes you've ever come across with Kakarot, and then bear witness to just still images or barely moving models of these characters, it really throws you off and shows you exactly where they cut corners. Up next is story. Now, I love the story of Dragon Ball. It is the series that got me into anime, and I still hold the story in a special place in my heart. And for the most part, Kakarot does a pretty good job respecting the source material. But there are some really irritating moments in the story where, in order to pad out the length of the game, they chose to add in just some of the most stupid and pointless shit I've ever seen. Like having you do fetch quests that take you all the way across the map to grab things in the same area in 3 different locations that are all like 20 feet away from each other. And yes, this is done more than once. They do it with Gohan, and then for some reason they also choose to do it with Vegeta? Like, why him? Wouldn't he just have someone else do it? Vegeta would never agree to that. It's just so weird. He'd rather blow up the planet than do chores. It's hard to ignore a mandatory fetch quest when it's just shoved into your face. Even more noticeable when it's into something like Dragon Ball, a series mostly well known for its fast-paced and intense action. Speaking of action, how about we move on to the thing I have the most to talk about now? Now, I like the combat of Kakarot. I will stand by that till the end of time. But there is no doubt that it has some issues. First off is the enemy variety. Now Kakarot's combat is always airborne, which allows them to take full control over making fights as fast and intense as they are in the show. However, this also comes with the downside of severely limiting the enemies you can fight, as most battles with random enemies are around 3 or 4 different types. Not that fighting them is very useful at all, as they barely give you EXP whatsoever. You're better off just doing one of the various boring side quests, or just going through the story, as you're showered with experience that makes every battle with the enemies flying around look like total garbage in comparison. Kinda sucks, since games like Boo's Fury and Attack of the Saiyans made enemy encounters actually felt like they meant something. Speaking of combat experience, let's move on to my final part of this video, and talk about the boss fights. Now, the boss fights are both this game's strongest asset, and one of its biggest weaknesses. Now, the boss fights are very well made for the most part. They're challenging, especially on hard. They boast some heavy-hitting attacks and dangerous specials that can fuck every single crevice of your shit if you stop paying attention for a single second. And while those I will definitely praise, these bosses also come with some problems. The first and foremost is the amount of health they have. The further into Kakarot you get, you start noticing that bosses' health bars start getting ridiculously huge. And not in a way that makes fights more fun, more along the lines of making them feel way longer than needed. It starts to become noticeable after the Frieza saga and gets to its absolute worst during the Boo saga. The health bars get so comically long that you're better off just completely ignoring combo attacks and instead just spamming the most broken special attacks you can think of, like Spirit Bomb or Big Bang Attack, which is also influenced just due to how ridiculous the super armor gets later on. I remember that some bosses would be able to just break out of any combo I threw at them without any effort whatsoever and land a massive hit that cost me about a third of my health bar, and I just couldn't do anything about it. It got frustrating when you're just trying to get into the flow of combat or use attacks, and then boss just gain this aura that you can't see because combos are just flipping you around all over the place. And then right at the end when you end it, they hit this huge move that not only stuns you, but drains so much of your health. It starts to feel like the game is actively being unfair on purpose. And you just start nearly wanting to just snap your controller in half at the absolute bullshit of it. As a result, boss fights can very much start turning into long, drawn-out, repetitive slogs where the only hope of victory is spamming special moves to even have the slightest bit of hope of draining their boss's health without it taking 40 minutes. It's pretty fucked, man. They wanted to make the bosses feel like larger-than-life threats, and I respect that, but the fights just become long, tedious slogs in the later half of the game, which is bullshit considering just how awesome everything up to Frieza is. Oh yeah, there's also party members in this game. They're so inconsequential to the fight that you kind of just forget about them half the time. It's weird that they added them. I get why they can be somewhat helpful, maybe, but once you get to the late game, you kind of just forget they're there. Also, due to the fact that you can't swap in between battle, yeah, you're pretty much just locked into like one of 4 characters throughout your entire playthrough, and that honestly is kind of lame. I would have loved to play as Tien and Krillin during the Saiyan saga, but nope, you're Gohan and Piccolo. Feels like a massive missed opportunity in all honesty. Like, imagine during these battles you could swap in between the characters. Like, oh no, Krillin was getting his ass beat. Swap over to Tien and then fight using him. Like, wouldn't that be so much cooler than just having only one character and having teammates? That's kind of the one complaint I had with Final Fantasy XVI, among the other ones, but we'll get to that in a later video, was that you couldn't really use any of your other party members. You could command Torgal and that's about it. Would have been cool if Kakarot just let me swap between my teammates, but nah, gotta be one of these guys, I guess. Alright, I've made my points. Let's get to the end of the video. Thank you for hearing this out. So even with all of my complaints, I still really did enjoy my time with Kakarot, despite my issues with it. I wouldn't say to get this game at full price, but if you see it on sale or have PlayStation Plus, I would recommend picking it up to play if you're a Dragon Ball fan who wants to play a pretty good Dragon Ball game. It is a good game, but it is not a great game. My final rating for this game is a pretty decent 6 out of 10. I never touched the DLC, mainly due to the main game not impressing me enough to get it, but I'm curious. Is the DLC any good? Let me know down below if it is or not, because I am kind of curious. And if you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and hit that like and subscribe button for more RPG content. Love you all, and have a wonderful day.